I mean, I want you to imagine being locked inside a literal prison, right? Like surrounded by barbed wire.
Yeah, armed guards, just the absolute worst of humanity.
Exactly. And yet somehow possessing more psychological freedom than people who are just, walking the streets of a free city. Today, we are looking at a woman who achieved exactly that.
It's a premise that completely challenges, well, everything we think we know about human resilience, because we're so conditioned to view severe trauma as a permanent life sentence.
Right. Which is why we are doing a deep dive into the life, the work, and really the sheer psychological genius of Dr. Edith Eva Eger. She was a Holocaust survivor, a renowned clinical psychologist, and just an incredible author who recently passed away at the age of 98.
Her journey is staggering. I mean, she lived through the darkest, most incomprehensible chapters of human history. But she didn't just survive them. She basically dissected her own survival to teach the rest of us how to find light in our own lives.
Yeah, and to do that, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources today. We've got Bill Gates' detailed review of her memoir. We have academic papers breaking down her clinical philosophy, hours of her interviews, and comprehensive summaries of her landmark books, The Choice and The Gift.
It's a lot of incredible material to work through.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore the profound psychological difference between a physical prison and a mental one. We want to uncover Dr. Eger's practical blueprint for moving from victimhood to total inner freedom. Okay, let's unpack this.
So, to truly grasp the mechanics of her psychological framework, we have to establish the baseline of her physical reality, right? Her story really begins in Hungary, before the world collapsed.
Yeah, back then Edith, or Edie as her family called her, was a teenager with massive ambitions. I mean, she was a brilliant ballerina, an Olympic caliber gymnast.
So, wow.
Yeah. But by 1942, the Hungarian government began enacting these really strict anti-Semitic laws. She was abruptly kicked off the gymnastics team simply because she was Jewish. So the future she had been meticulously building was just erased.
And tragically, that erasure was just the prologue. The situation deteriorated rapidly, and by 1944, her family was stripped of their home. They were forced into a brick factory, crammed alongside like 12,000 other Jews.
It's just horrific.
It really is. And from that holding area, they were loaded into cattle cars and transported directly to Auschwitz.
And in the moment she arrives on that platform, it's beyond devastating. I mean, she's 16 years old.
Just a kid.
Right. In the chaos, she is separated from her father, and then she comes face to face with Joseph Mengele.
The notorious angel of death.
Exactly. He's standing there deciding who lives and who dies. He sends her mother to the left. Edie asks where her mother is going, and a guard just casually points to the smoke rising from a chimney. Her mother was sent directly to the gas chambers.
It was a sudden, absolute severing of every anchor she had in the world. But what happens next, that very same evening, actually, is where we see the first incredible seeds of her psychological survival strategy.
Right, because Mengele comes into the barracks that night. He's looking for entertainment, and he forces this 16-year-old girl, whose mother he murdered just hours prior, to dance for him.
What's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism she employs in that terrifying moment. When physical escape is impossible, the human nervous system's only available flight response is to flee inward.
So she checks out.
No, that's the thing. She didn't just passively check out. She closed her eyes and actively constructed an alternate reality. She refused to be in that wooden barracks. She imagined the orchestra playing Tchaikovsky.
Wow.
Yeah, she imagined she was dancing on the magnificent stage of the Budapest Opera House.
I love how she described remembering the last piece of advice her mother gave her in the cattle car. She said, just remember, no one can take away from you what you've put in your mind.
That's so powerful.
It really is. It's like she found a volume knob for reality, turning down the horrors of the barracks and turning up her own inner world. But, I mean, on a neurological level, how does someone even access that kind of mental control when their physical reality is complete torture?
Well, by understanding that dissociation doesn't have to be a surrender, it can actually be an act of profound defiance.
Interesting.
In trauma psychology, we often see the psyche shatter to protect itself. Eger did the opposite. She integrated her past discipline as a dancer to anchor her mind. By retreating into that constructed inner world, she proved to herself that while her body was imprisoned, her consciousness remained completely untouchable.
She was exercising the absolute last shred of autonomy she had left.
Exactly.
And for that dance, Mengele gave her a loaf of bread.
Which she immediately shared with the other girls in her barracks.
Right. And that choice actually saved her life later on. During a brutal death march near the end of the war, when Eger was too weak to walk and was literally about to be shot by the guards, the very girls she had shared that bread with formed a chair with their arms and carried her.
It highlights a crucial through line in her philosophy.
Huh?
Even in the literal depths of hell, we are constantly making choices. She chose to share. She chose her inner reality.
But surviving the camps was only half the battle. Because when an American soldier finally pulls her from a pile of corpses in the Gunskirchen camp in May 1945, her physical liberation actually triggers the start of a massive psychological crisis.
Yeah, the physical toll was horrific. She weighed just 71 pounds. Her back was broken. She had typhoid fever.
Unbelievable.
But as her body slowly began to mend, a whole new prison was being built in her mind.
Right. So she eventually marries Bella, a Jewish resistance fighter, and they immigrate to the United States. She finds herself in Baltimore working in an underwear factory. She is struggling with a new language, living in extreme poverty. But the real torment is internal.
Yeah, the survivor's guilt.
Exactly. She is entirely consumed by it. The question, why did I survive when so many others perished, is just playing on a constant torturous loop.
The core concept Eger realized during those years in Baltimore is that, as she put it, nightmares know no geography.
Wow. Nightmares know no geography.
Right. You can cross an ocean, you can change your name, you can start a new family, but your nervous system comes with you. Escaping a physical place does not erase the trauma that is essentially trapped in your body's survival responses.
I want to dig into that because it's such a tragic irony. She escapes the worst place on Earth, but she spends decades living in what she called a secret world. She hid her past. She refused to speak Hungarian. She wouldn't even tell her own children about her experiences.
Yeah, total avoidance.
Why do humans do that? I mean, it sounds like escaping a burning building, but still smelling the smoke everywhere you go for decades. Why keep the smoke locked inside with you?
Because of a profound psychological distinction Eger makes between victimization and victimhood.
Okay, what's the difference?
Victimization is an external event. It is the oppressor, the disease, the accident, the bully. It is entirely out of your control. Eger was a victim of the Holocaust. That is an undeniable historical fact.
But victimhood is an entirely different beast.
Precisely. Victimhood is an internal identity. We become our own jailers when we maintain a mindset that is rigid, stuck in the past, and obsessed with what we lost. For years, Eger's avoidance felt like survival to her.
Like if she didn't look at the wound, maybe it wouldn't hurt.
Exactly. She was suppressing her emotions to function in society. But suppressing the bad also suppresses the good. She was physically free in America, but mentally she was still a prisoner in Auschwitz.
Which leads to one of her most famous insights from the sources. She says, "You can't heal if you can't feel." By trying to outrun the pain, she was actually feeding it. So how does someone break out of a prison when they are simultaneously the prisoner and the warden?
The turning point for Eger came when a fellow student handed her a copy of Viktor Frankl's seminal book, Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl was also a clinical psychologist and a fellow survivor of Auschwitz.
Reading his work was the catalyst. It gave her the permission to realize that her inner life was still hers to command. But it's vital to point out that this wasn't some overnight magic trick, right?
Oh, definitely not.
The sources show a really messy, arduous middle ground. She doesn't just read a book and feel cured. She puts in decades of grueling academic and emotional work, eventually earning her PhD in clinical psychology in 1978 when she is in her 50s.
That timeline is so important, it completely dismantles the myth of the instant epiphany. She painstakingly applied Frankl's existential theories to her own traumatized nervous system. And she didn't stop there.
No, she didn't.
In 1990, she actually traveled back to Auschwitz to face her repressed emotions head-on. She returned to the site of her deepest trauma not as a helpless victim, but as a survivor claiming her narrative.
Now, I want to address you, the listener, directly for a second. We've all been handed that tired cliche, time heals all wounds. But Eger's life proves that is completely false. Decades had passed since the war, and before she did the work, she was still suffocating. Why is time actually irrelevant to emotional healing?
The academic paper from the Pranav Journal of Multidisciplinary Studies that we reviewed breaks this down beautifully. Time doesn't heal, because time is just a passive measurement.
Right.
What you do at the time heals. If you sit in a room for 20 years avoiding your feelings, you will just be a person who's avoided their feelings for 20 years. Healing requires active cognitive disruption.
And the paper outlines her specific formula for that disruption, right? To change our behavior, we must change our feelings. And to change our feelings, we must change our thoughts.
Yeah, it all traces back to the cognitive patterns we reinforce. The most critical shift she identifies is moving from the question, why me, to the question, what now?
I want to explore why that shift is so incredibly difficult. Because why me is actually a very comfortable place for the brain to sit. If
Yeah.
I ask why me, I am the victim of an unfair universe. It absolves me of responsibility. But asking what now? That is a heavy burden that requires me to act.
That is a brilliant observation. Why me keeps you passive. What
Yeah.
now is the hallmark of the survivor mindset. A survivor acknowledges the reality of the devastation, but demands agency over the next step.
Which brings us to a part of the deep dive that might make some of us uncomfortable. Because it's easy to listen to Dr. Eger's story and think, wow, she survived the Holocaust, her trauma is massive and entirely valid. But what about us?
Right.
What about the listener dealing with a micromanaging boss or a bad breakup or just the overwhelming low-grade anxiety of modern life? It's almost a reflex to invalidate our own struggles by saying, well, someone else has it worse.
Eger was fiercely adamant about dismantling that exact reflex. Her clinical philosophy rests heavily on the concept that there is no hierarchy of suffering.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Bill Gates actually highlighted this in his review of her book. He brought up his favorite anecdote, where Eger is treating a patient in her clinical practice. This woman comes into the office absolutely sobbing, devastated, because her brand new car was delivered in the wrong shade of yellow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, I have to be honest. If I survived Auschwitz and a woman came into my office crying about a yellow car, I think I would throw her out. I'd point to the door. How does she suppress that instinct?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, she understood that pain is entirely subjective. Eger didn't roll her eyes or minimize the woman's distress. She treated that patient's pain with absolute seriousness because she knew the tears weren't really about the car.
Right. The car is just a proxy.
Exactly. It was the tipping point for the bigger, missing things in this woman's life. Perhaps emotional isolation, chronic disappointment, or a lack of control.
So comparing suffering is just a trap.
A massive trap. If you tell yourself your pain isn't bad enough to validate because you didn't suffer like Eger, you are just suppressing it. And an unexamined wound festers, no matter how small the cut. Eger constantly reminded her patients that the opposite of depression is expression.
So practically speaking, how do we apply this? When we feel paralyzed by these seemingly small everyday things, burnout, fear of failure, loneliness, what is her framework for processing it?
The sources outline a few highly practical steps based on Eger's clinical methods. First, you have to acknowledge the emotion without judgment. Don't layer guilt on top of your anxiety by telling yourself you shouldn't feel bad. Invite the feeling in.
Okay, and then?
Second, she uses a technique called the vital signs check-in.
I imagine that vital signs check-in is basically a biofeedback loop. By pausing throughout the day and asking yourself, do I feel soft and warm or cold and stiff? You're bypassing the brain's rationalizations and going straight to the body's stress response.
You've hit the nail on the head. The cognitive brain is brilliant at lying to us, but the nervous system never lies. If you are cold and stiff, your body is telling you that you are in a state of resistance or fear. By checking in with your physical tension, you ground yourself in the present reality.
And from that grounded place, you can employ her third step, which is actively interrupting negative self-talk. When your brain starts spinning the narrative of, I can't deal with this, you consciously interrupt that pattern and replace it with forward-looking action. You replace I can't with what now?
That's the genius of her framework. You are taking that profound lesson from the cattle car, no one can take away from you what you've put in your mind, and applying it to a Tuesday morning traffic jam. The scale of the trauma shrinks, but the neurological mechanics of the human mind remain identical.
Which pulls us toward the culmination of her philosophy and undeniably the most challenging part of this entire deep dive. We have to talk about forgiveness, rage, and the duality of human nature.
This is where Eger's work pushes us right to the very edge of our comfort zones, asking us to reevaluate our deepest resentments.
There is a story from her clinical practice where a judge mandates therapy for a 14-year-old boy. This kid walks into Eger's office wearing a racist t-shirt and spewing absolute venom. He is full of hate. And Eger, a woman whose parents were murdered by bigots, is sitting across from him.
It's incredibly tense.
Right. Our instinct would be to condemn him. But instead, she did something radical. She looked for the Nazi in herself.
It is a profound, almost jarring psychological exploration of empathy. She believed fundamentally that humans are born to love, but we learn to hate. By looking for the Nazi in herself, she wasn't endorsing his bigoted views for a second.
No, of course not.
She was acknowledging the universal human capacity for anger, prejudice, and hatred. She recognized that this 14-year-old boy had been brainwashed, much like the guards in the camps were brainwashed.
She actually mentioned that she used to pray for the Nazi guards because she recognized they were prisoners of their own hatred. But I need to pause here and address the listener directly. If you are listening to this and thinking of someone who deeply wronged you, the idea of forgiving them or praying for them might feel incredibly unjust. It feels like letting them win. Doesn't forgiveness let the perpetrator off the hook?
That is the most common and damaging misunderstanding about forgiveness. Eger is crystal clear on this. Forgiveness is not about the perpetrator. It does not excuse the crime. It doesn't mean you have to reconcile with the person who hurt you.
Then who is it for?
Forgiveness is a fundamentally selfish act. In the absolute best possible way, it is entirely for the victim.
How does that work psychologically?
Because to hold on to unforgiveness and rage is to remain chained to the person who hurt you. You are carrying your abuser around in your mind, giving them free rent in your head. Eger teaches that to forgive is to sever that psychological chain. It means grieving what happened, grieving what didn't happen, and ultimately giving up the hope for a different past.
Giving up the hope for a different past. That phrase is a gut punch. You stop wishing it hadn't happened, you stop bargaining with history, and you accept that the harm was done.
Yes, you cannot change it. But Eger also makes a vital point. There is no forgiveness without rage. You cannot skip the anger. You have to feel the absolute fury of the injustice, process it, and then consciously choose to let it go. Only by dropping that heavy burden can you step out of the mental prison and live in what she calls the sacred present.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a tremendous amount of ground here today. For you, the listener, the ultimate takeaway from Dr. Edith Eva Eger's life is that our painful experiences, no matter how big or small, no matter if they happen in a camp or a cubicle, are not a liability. They are a profound source of perspective.
They force us to figure out what we are made of. The physical prisons of life, the tragedies that befall us, might be entirely out of our control. But the mental prisons are built and dismantled by our own internal choices.
The biggest prison is in your own mind. And in your pocket right now, you already hold the key.
It requires the willingness to take absolute responsibility for your inner life, to stop asking, why me, and take on the empowering burden of what now.
Which leaves us with one final thought. We talked earlier about how the brain clings to emotional prisons to protect us from unexamined pain. Just like an immune system can mistakenly attack the body to protect it, our minds build these mental prisons as a defense mechanism that eventually becomes the disease itself. If you are the architect of your own mental prison and your repetitive negative thoughts are the immune response keeping you trapped inside, what is the very first brick you are going to choose to remove today?